In 1998, New Line Cinema released Blade, an R-rated horror action film that starred Wesley Snipes as the eponymous vampire hunter. Despite so-so reviews and some atrocious, even for the time, CGI effects, it managed to bring home 3 times its budget of $45 million and developed a strong cult following that persists to this day. It's also a film based on a Marvel character, which, while it may seem strange now in an age of wikis and Marvel dominance, was at the time a little-known trivia fact outside of comic book nerd circles. Because the film doesn't really mention Marvel at all outside of this blink and you'll miss it credit in the opening rave scene. Some of this makes sense. In 1998, Marvel was still emerging from their 1996 bankruptcy, and their path forward was still really unclear. Plus, comic book movies were sort of passé in 1998, the era of Batman and Robin, and Steel, and The Phantom, and Spawn. I'm not sure anyone wanted this movie to be associated with comic books. A few years later, 2000's X-Men bumped Marvel Entertainment Group up to be listed among its producers rather than just giving it a based on characters created by credit, but they were still kind of hidden or subdued. Marvel didn't manage to secure an actual production logo before a film until 2002's Spider-Man, and it's the classic comic book page flappin' one we've seen in most of their films up through 2016. It's this deep crimson red. In the versions that have audio, the pages sound glossy and thick, and it just makes you want to go flip through some comics. It's a logo that very much says, hey, we're a comic book company. And that made sense in 2002 as the company that licensed its comic book properties out to film studios to create movies based on those comics. But by the mid-2010s, it made less sense. By that point, Marvel was a cultural and financial juggernaut producing their own movies based on the properties they held. Why does their logo just say, hey, we're the comic book guys? So in 2016, in front of Doctor Strange, they introduced a new tag for Marvel Studios. Like the 2002 tag before it, it too is a collage of characters that slowly give way to the Marvel Studios logo over a crimson backdrop. But where the panels of the old logo were solely a reference to Marvel's comic roots, the new logo tried to show the progression of these characters and the studio itself. It starts with comic book panels, again like the old logo, but it quickly gives way to scripts and concept art representing pre-production, then clips from individual finished films, telling the story of how these characters leapt from panel to screen. And as the camera pulls back and winds through these various scenes, the image tilts, revealing the Marvel Studios logo. And for like a 20-second production splash, it was a surprisingly effective statement. First, it tried to draw a circle around what was and was not a Marvel Cinematic Universe film. Movies based around Marvel properties like Fantastic Four and Ghost Rider and X-Men were still being released into theaters at the time, and it was important that people understood that while those movies also had a Marvel logo at their opening and were based on Marvel characters, they were not Marvel Studios productions and would not be considered part of this experimental, intertextual universe they were now building out. Showing what characters and movies were considered part of this universe, and ignoring those that weren't, helped communicate this. And second, it tried to showcase the breadth of characters that were held by that big intertextual experiment. Doctor Strange was the 14th MCU film, and while they hadn't until that point yet introduced wizards, they did have an all-American Boy Scout from World War II, an entire Norse god's kingdom, a Hulk, a vaguely magical girl and her maroon robot boyfriend who could fly, a talking raccoon with a gun who had a plant for a friend, and a guy who could shrink and grow at will. They even had a billionaire CEO who could actually do engineering work, which is how you know it's in a fantasy universe.
Hey. Those Merlin engines are fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, good idea for an electric jet.
You do?
Yeah.
Then we'll make it work.
Putting all these different characters in one logo reminded you that they sat in a shared universe, even if their individual films felt like they stood alone. Remember, Guardians didn't really cross over with the rest of the Avengers until Infinity War. Like, I don't want to spend too much time celebrating Marvel Studios of all things. They're perhaps the most dominant pop culture force on Earth at the moment, so they absolutely don't need defending. My point is just this. The production logo made sense. It told you that all of these characters live in one universe despite the vastly different experiences and visual styles between them and between their films, and the story of the production studio itself, lifting characters from comic book panels and bringing them to the big screen. Lately, though, I've noticed a trend where more and more companies are using this style of introduction, showing a stable of known and beloved characters to represent a brand or production company as a whole. But while they may take inspiration from the Marvel Studios logo, they don't really seem to know what makes it work, resulting in, at times, awkward branding. I first took notice of this when DreamWorks announced their new logo that would be run in front of Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. DreamWorks' classic cinematic production splash is a boy fishing while nestled in a crescent moon as a guitar gently strums and then crescendos into an orchestral arrangement. The original DreamWorks logo worked because it captured the vision for the then new production company. The kid in the moon thing had a bit of an Amblin Entertainment flair reminding you of Spielberg's involvement. Meanwhile, the cloudy night sky and the dream logic of being able to nestle into a crescent moon conveyed a company interested in imaginative flights of fancy, free from the creative constraints at Disney and Universal that led to DreamWorks' founding. It also arguably captured the family-friendly tone their animated movies would try to shoot for. We could debate this a bit. Early DreamWorks movies like Prince of Egypt and Spirit reflect the tone of the original logo far better than Shrek, which would set the stage for all the ass-pinching, wisecracking characters whose movies all end in dance-offs that would come to identify the DreamWorks animation brand. And so to reflect that newfound sense of ironic detachment, they would often vandalize their own logo to reflect the new film's mischievous properties.
I'll catch you!
Sweet.
But the new logo isn't really a property-specific, bespoke riff on the boy in the moon thing. Instead, the boy gets up and windsurfs through the stars, bumping into various DreamWorks characters along the way before settling back into the logo. And it's not very good. This feels sterile and generic. While it's clearly going for a Marvel-style tour of other films, unlike Marvel, these characters aren't set in the same world. They're just owned by the same company. So it doesn't feel like a cohesive reminder that the film you're about to see sits in a greater pantheon, or invite you to reflect on how the events here could impact a greater world. Instead, it feels like a sizzle reel for investors. We're the guys with the Boss Baby. And Trolls. Remember the one that farts? That one was great. There's nothing there about the film you're about to see, and it doesn't really tell the story of where this menagerie of characters came from, which is a really interesting story in its own right, and you should really read Disney more. It's amazing. The reason for this attempt to unify the DreamWorks branding may have been revealed during the production of this video, though. Universal Pictures owns DreamWorks Animation, and Universal just announced a new mini theme park aimed at kids to open in Frisco, Texas, whose concept renderings hint heavily towards a number of DreamWorks properties. Additionally, in Universal Studios in Orlando, a kids zone featuring properties like Curious George and Barney and Fievel Goes West closed in January because millennials are all pushing 40 now, and Don Bluth movies starring Dom DeLuise and Jimmy Stewart just aren't bringing in 3 to 10-year-olds in 2023. While no official announcement about what's replacing it has been made, construction walls have since gone up that hint heavily towards a rumored kids zone themed around a variety of DreamWorks properties. So the reason to start branding DreamWorks as a collection of otherwise disparate characters may be because they want to sell that package of characters as a singular experience in the parks. Makes you think. But you don't have to go to a different production company to find this sort of thing. It's also happening right at Disney. Star Wars also has a collage of characters logo, which is weird because it's not a production studio, but just a branding effort. Like, Lucasfilm is the production studio behind Star Wars, but unlike Marvel, who only make Marvel movies, Lucasfilm has a host of properties Disney wants to take advantage of, like Willow and Indiana Jones, and, God willing, Day of the Tentacle. So they want Lucasfilm's production logo to represent a certain family-friendly whimsy that is maybe too edgy for the Disney brand, but still reflects a relatively high level of quality. It plays well with millennials and aging Gen Xers who all tend to have kids. It's a production studio that they want to preserve the name of, but not necessarily one that they want to make exclusive to Star Wars. But I guess someone decided it was important to have a splash for the brand itself? I get what they're going for. The blue and red harkens back to the journeys of Anakin's lightsaber and its various owners as they fight the forces of space fascism and Sith influence. It also calls to mind the lightsaber fight at the climax of Empire Strikes Back, which is arguably the series' high point in the mind of its original audience. The various droids and helmets are immediately recognizable as Star Warsy and can span multiple eras in the Star Wars saga, helping connect everything together. And unlike human faces, they A, don't age or require likeness rights, and B, wouldn't give off a creepy vibe if staring stoically straight at the audience while red and blue lights swirl around them. So, I get the attempts to unify the brand, to have a single splash that lets you go, get ready for some Star Wars! But, first of all, I think they kind of already had that, and I famously hate it. And secondly, for a splash meant to be a unifying branding effort, it gives off weird vibes that don't exactly feel Star Wars to me. Like, first of all, the Star Wars splash initially ran before The Mandalorian, a character famous for his chrome armor, so showing various bits of Star Wars history in chrome makes sense. But then they just kind of kept using it? Star Wars famously made space grungy and gross and lived in. That was part of its whole appeal. This isn't Flash Gordon, this is real space fantasy. We got grime and dirt. Sleek chrome feels at odds with the brand. It's very dissonant in front of something like Andor. Second, maybe this is just my own bias showing, but branding Star Wars as a perpetual lightsaber battle feels like the worst thing you could do. Lightsabers are cool, sure, but one of the recurring criticisms of modern Star Wars is that it has just become an extended series of lightsaber fights. It's part of what made Andor so refreshing. It's just people. I get the temptation to tie yourself to something strongly associated with your brand, but also, oh my god, are people tired of it? Third, because the logo needs to be metal faces, it's mostly either droids or Imperial helmets. The result is that the logo is 50% fasci soldiers and dictators, and 50% the sapient slave race the franchise still doesn't really know how to handle. Are droids fully sentient beings capable of love?
What are you doing there, 3PO?
Taking one last look, sir, at my friends.
Property?
This R2 unit has a bad motivator, look!
Hey, what are you trying to push on us?
No comment.
You can make it! Hurry!
So when your logo screams, Star Wars, the sleek, shiny as hell fascism and slave robot franchise made entirely of lightsaber battles, it both doesn't feel like Star Wars to me and also kind of fails to get me all that excited for whatever I'm about to watch. It just doesn't work for me, but maybe that's a personal response. Ultimately, my real criticism with the Star Wars splash, though, is that it doesn't feel necessary. It isn't a production company, it's a branding effort, and one that I feel only gets it half right. I'll put it this way, Marvel has used their intro to commemorate the deaths of Stan Lee and Chadwick Boseman. Star Wars uses theirs for in-jokes. In one of the Kenobi splashes, one of the featured objects is a kitchen sink, a reference to the time in Revenge of the Sith where ILM used a kitchen sink as debris that destroyed a capital ship. It's a cute reference to the 3 people that follow that level of ILM trivia, but everyone else was mostly just left confused. I don't know, the intro doesn't feel as soulless as DreamWorks' character logo, but it does feel like it carries all the weight of an official Nintendo licensed product sticker. It's a poorly thought out brand marker that made sense in front of The Mandalorian that they've kept using without really putting any effort into figuring out what their branding should actually be. But the character splash logos really came to a head for me and prompted me to make this video when I got around to booting up Call of Duty Warzone 2 and was met with this intro. Okay, So I get why DreamWorks would make a character-based intro that feels like a marketing portfolio. And I get why Disney feels the need to have a watermark for its Star Wars properties. But what possessed Activision to think that this was a good idea? First of all, this isn't just a character-based logo like the other two. This is straight up the character half of the Marvel logo, but Call of Duty. Now, to be fair, this is really not all that out of pocket for Call of Duty. As a franchise, it has long pilfered from popular culture to build its worlds. The first 3 Modern Warfare games are, effectively, an extended tribute to the works of Michael Bay.
I already dropped them!
Seriously, there's a lot of The Rock in the first few Modern Warfare games.
Keep it steady.
Like, it's weird.
You're 9 o'clock. Roger, tracking target. Got a man down. Got him. Chino. Copy that.
And even 2022's Modern Warfare 2 seems to mix Jason Bourne's serious CIA lady officer calling the shots stuff, with at least 2 nods to Sicario, and even an extended sequence seemingly inspired by Lone Survivor. Those are adult action movies that are tonally within a stone's throw of Call of Duty, though. But Marvel movies?
It'll kill you. Only if I die? Yes. That's what killing you means.
There's a bit of a gap there, tonally, I think. The obvious problem here is that Call of Duty might be one of the least character-driven franchises on the planet, which is itself actually kind of interesting. Like, remember that Call of Duty's big gimmick from the beginning in 2003 was that it shows wars from multiple perspectives, whether that's different fronts in World War II in the original game, or swapping between teams and protagonists in the Modern Warfare franchise. You swap characters so much that the game isn't afraid to kill you at the end of missions semi-regularly. So you'd think with all these different characters you could build a little universe of memorable toy soldiers to have pretend wars with. But it's also a game where a lot of the cutscenes are just mission briefings done via voiceover.
Roach, Ghost! Come in, Ghost! You copy? Does anyone copy?
They're dead, so. Shepard's cleaning house. I'm working my way back to you.
And in-game, your character interactions are almost exclusively marching orders and target callouts barked at you from off-camera.
We'll check the shadows. Truck, you getting anything on your comms?
Nothing but static.
Hold up.
Jam's got us in the
Shooters
dark.
in the store below. Switch them off.
It's why people remember Keith David being in the original Modern Warfare 2, but no one really remembers Sergeant Foley. They just remember Keith David telling them where to go and what to do.
Ramirez! Take your team and secure the Burger Towns. We're gonna move Raptor over there. This location has been compromised.
And because it's a realistic military game, you don't have the breadth of character design you may get from something like Fortnite. Everyone's just kind of a soldier whose motivation is the mission, whose backstory really doesn't matter, and whose arc is just the arc of their grenades. It's clear, though, that someone involved in the production of Call of Duty wants this character-based universe building to happen. The recent Modern Warfare iterations have tried very hard at this by having cutscenes be less like mission planning and more like movie cutscenes. They've also worked hard to make each character on the team more easily identifiable through race, gender, clothing, and some obscenely terrible facial hair. They've also started to offer dialogue options in ways that are meant to build relationships with the characters. In 2020's Modern Warfare, when Farah is being interrogated by Russian forces, you get to choose your response in an attempt to make her defiance in the face of torture more memorable.
Now, tell me about Commander Karim and the failed message.
The messages are from me. I am Karim.
No, Karim is the leader, you're just a messenger.
And in Modern Warfare 2, you get to engage with some small talk between Price and Gaz and the CIA boss lady in an attempt to build camaraderie just before CIA boss lady gets kidnapped so that you'll feel bad.
Laswell.
Talk to me, Garrick.
You done this before?
Many times, Sergeant. Since you were in diapers.
Well, in fairness, he was probably potty-trained by then, Kate.
They're emotionally manipulative and surgically deployed. We don't want anyone to get the impression that this is a role-playing game or something, but they are about building relationships with the characters in the game, even if it's just to provoke a specific emotional response. And speaking of the CIA boss lady's kidnapping, in the campaign of 2022's Modern Warfare 2, we actually get what feel like two Marvel character reveals back to back. After Laswell is captured and the government says they can't help Price and team get her back, the helicopter that picks up Price and Gaz is revealed to be piloted by... Nikolai, the Russian mercenary who was your pilot throughout all of the original Modern Warfare 2.
Captain Price, I'm taking off in 1 minute. You better hurry if you want right out of here.
And who had an active presence in 2020's Modern Warfare as a Russian insider. You even get like a push-in with the character as he reveals himself that hangs for a few frames too long, like it's waiting for an audience's applause, that Nick's back. And as they board the plane, Price and Gaz have this exchange.
We'll be going head-to-head with AQ on that hotel. We're gonna have hundreds more protecting Laswell. We need an army.
Fucking get us an army.
Which sounds a lot to me like this.
We're on our own.
Maybe not. I know a guy.
And sure enough, when we cut away from Nikolai, we see... Well, first we see this, which is another giveaway that Civil War was an aesthetic influence here. We then cut to the caravan holding CIA lady hostage, but up on the ridge looking over them, we pan up, and who could it be? It's Farah, from the last game. We know her.
I know you know a lot of super people, so thanks for thanking of me.
I don't know if the idea is to make the characters more memorable and popular so that their skins could be sold in Warzone, or if the creative team really wants to start pushing the series towards a more narrative-based approach, or if the superheroization of Modern Warfare characters is just envy of yet another popular Hollywood thing that Call of Duty wants to claim for itself. But this character-focused approach has only really been going on for the past 2 games of a franchise that's been running since 2003, and is known primarily for its multiplayer. So branding their entire franchise with a collage of faces not just from the past 2 games, but from the past several feels utterly bizarre, especially if you just play Warzone and have no idea who any of these people are. Again, the problem isn't the splash itself, it's the lack of thought about what the splash says or means. Moving Call of Duty to a more character-focused property makes sense, both to its history and its current reimagining, and so a logo that reflects that could be really cool. But this is just ripping off Marvel. So what have we learned by staring too hard at a bunch of corporate logos? Well, first, I think there's an emerging trend where the properties define the brand rather than vice versa. That is to say, 20 years ago, a Disney production bumper was the promise of a certain tone and level of quality. You might go see Hunchback of Notre Dame because it's the new Disney movie, a family-friendly animated title.
From Walt Disney Pictures comes this summer's #1 family movie.
But now, Disney is defined by its constituent fandoms, of which the Disney brand itself is one of them, but stay with me. This is basically how they laid Disney Plus out, with different forever brands organizing the app rather than genres or topics or target audiences. Disney isn't a brand that produces independent works, it's a collection of mega properties. Instead of having their corporate brand need to be one identity to all people, these companies can represent themselves as a portfolio of entertainment properties that each have their own dedicated and potentially powerful fandom. So Blumhouse stops selling itself just as the mid-budget horror movie studio, and instead becomes the label that has classic slashers like Michael Myers, the utterly unsubtle political commentary of The Purge, the horror comedy of Happy Death Day, and the modern terror of Insidious. Similarly, DreamWorks doesn't have to be just the house of sarcastic, celebrity-voiced protagonists where every movie ends in a dance-off. It gets to be the home of more earnest characters like Toothless or Puss in Boots, while keeping the sardonic fart joke characters like Trolls and Boss Baby. And even the millennial meme factory that is Shrek. And with the rise of forever brands, there's an increasing awareness that companies need to be able to sell you not just on the title you're about to enjoy, but on the whole universe the game or film takes place in. These are brands that support entire ecosystems of products. You need something to ensure that a 6-episode streaming miniseries and a major motion picture release to theaters are unambiguously part of the same package, and you need to entice people who liked this thing to check out the other things, all under the same branding. This is less important for licensed products though, and I'm very curious to see whether, say, Jedi Survivor launches with the same Star Wars splash when it comes out in a few months. It's presumably canon-ish, they've been treating it that way, but it's also not directly tied to the Disney platform proper. Anyways, this could all just be a trend, a response to Marvel making more money than God, resulting in a lot of people copying their branding approach, cargo cult style, in an effort to chase that money. But I think the ongoing death of the monoculture has resulted in media companies realizing that they own small fandoms of individually beloved IPs more than they have a collective cultural cache as a production studio. I think having properties split between streaming and theatrical releases requires universe branding efforts to tie them all together. I think attempts to leverage emotional relationships with fictional characters is increasingly seen as a better ploy than promoting relationships with abstract brands. And I think that a generally increasing acceptance of intertextuality by mass audiences makes people more willing to see characters they don't know next to characters they do as an invitation, rather than provoking a, what, who was that response. Fortnite is built on the idea that unrelated characters can sit comfortably together. And meanwhile, Warner Brothers has put this theory to the test everywhere but their logo, in movies like Ready Player One and Space Jam Legacy, or video games like Multiverses.
Mega Godzilla!
Yeah, I see it. That's Kaneda's bike from Akira. It's a licensed skin over standard frame.
Whether this is all a flash in the pan thing or a changing tide of corporate branding, I think in the short term we're going to see more of these things, not less. And as long as that's the case, can we please put more thought into these things than simply editing together a collage of faces and calling it a day? Please?